Let's get Matthew Dowd yesterday saying all this Russian stuff not exactly going to help Trump's legislative agenda sail through anytime soon.
This is just another example of Donald Trump's behavior, which is basically to assert these allegations. He did it with voters. He said 3 million illegals voted in the election, and that's why Hillary Clinton won. And then when you went back to talk to all his people, they were like, I don't know what he's talking about, but we ought to look into it. The same thing he's doing here in this. I think what this is fundamentally going to do, this reminds me actually of Watergate, of what happened in Watergate. And if you remember what happened in...
Pretty strong term to put out there.
I think it reminds me in this way is Watergate, the break-in happened in June of 1972. Then the Washington Post, in a couple of stories, found a couple of bits of information. It took more than 2 years for that to finally come to fruition and the President of the United States to resign. I don't have any idea if the President of the United States is going to ultimately have to resign, whether or not through impeachment, but this is the kind of story that's going to preoccupy the White House for a long period of time and put their agenda on hold at best.
Okay, so there's the view here of the left, assuming that the president sends a tweet out saying that in October, some government agency was sanctioned to do surveillance on its computers. As we just heard from former CIA Mintel executive and chief Dr. Michael Schur, Trump has access to this information. All he has to do is ask. There's no doubt in my mind he got the transcript and then sent the tweet out. There's no way he just made this up, right? He's a president of the United States. That's crazy. We need a full investigation of this whole thing. And as far as the collusion with Russia, 8 months into this thing, there's not a shred of evidence, zero evidence that anybody did anything wrong connected to the Trump campaign or the Trump administration or the transition team or anything else. Unbelievable how we have gotten to where we are. Joining us now, Congressman Dr. Dave Brat. He's a Republican representing Central Virginia in the 7th District in Virginia. Dr. Brat, good to have you, man.
Hey, great to be on, John. Morning.
Never a dull moment.
No, never.
So we were going to talk about Obamacare and Trump's legislative agenda and some of the things that you're working on. Instead, we have a tweet storm going on Saturday and Sunday. Look, I can't see any scenario, Dave, where the president of the United States would send out information to the general public saying that his office was under surveillance if he just made that up. I just can't see any scenario where that would happen. Plus, what we do know is that the Justice Department went to FISA with an application for wiretapping in June. The judge wouldn't sign it, said they didn't have enough evidence. Then we know they went back in October and they took Trump's name out of it and took the phone lines out of it and just went with the electronics with his server, I believe. What do you think of this whole thing, Dr. Brat?
Well, I mean, first off, at the highest level, that these two parallel tracks are intimately connected, right? I mean, so the policy agenda is very much connected to the hearts and minds of the American people. And Trump gets that probably more than anyone else. And that's probably what's responsible for him winning a primary against 16 candidates and then the general. And so if you're going to get your agenda through, you cannot be undermined with what the mainstream press has been trying to do for him for a month. And he knows that. And so he's fighting the fight. And our past Republican presidents or whatever, tried to play nice guy with the press, and it never turned out well, right? The press acts like they're going to be your buddy for 5 minutes, and then the long knives come out. As soon as you're going to get any of your agenda through, it turns out no longer friends. And so on the details here, I mean, there's all sorts of interesting stuff coming out now. I mean, the New York Times had some clip that was used, and Mark Levin, who's a brilliant guy, made reference to some of those comments that the New York Times made about spying on the Trump team. And so, it's not. I don't think it's about the FISA courts specifically, but there's something going on there, and I think you're right on that. He just doesn't let it go out. And then I think at a minimum, his spokeswoman was on the Stephanopoulos show yesterday, Sunday morning shows, and whoever the talking head was gave her a hard time. Said, "Well, this is all from undocumented sources," and she said, "So is every one of your sources that you've given on the Russian, right? The Russian connection to Trump. So what's the difference, right? So at a minimum, this story is highlighting how the mainstream press gets away with just giving unnamed sources, anonymous sources, etc. And that when anybody else does that, they call the bluff. And so it was almost a comedy routine. But he's got to maintain the leverage with the press in order to get this agenda through, and it's sure not a pretty process watching it unfold, that's for sure.
Well, now you also have to admit, Congressman Dave Brat, that there's no evidence been presented of any wrongdoing as far as the Trump campaign or the transition team as regards to Russia. I mean, they've been investigating this. Obviously, they tried to get a FISA warrant in May, or the end of May, the beginning of June. We're into March. So 9 months they've been trying to find something. They don't have a shred of evidence anywhere.
Yeah.
No evidence.
Yeah, no,
yet it keeps perpetuating.
And it gets worse the more facts come out. I mean, on the Jeff Sessions piece, he's one of the most ethical guys you ever run into. So there was 2 charges. He met with the Russians twice, right? This cryptic stuff. And even on the Chuck Todd yesterday morning, Sessions recuses showing, implying that something is wrong there. And, so I mean, that's just total fake news coming out of Chuck Todd as usual.
Totally.
The real news is the Obama administration State Department set up meetings with all the ambassadors, with a lot of higher-ups, including Jeff Sessions, right? So there's over 20 ambassadors, and he bumped into one guy at a cocktail party or something like that, right? So that's one. The second one, he's in his office with his staff and 2 generals as U.S. Senator. And the remarks he was responding to from the senator of Saturday Night Live asked a very ambiguous question about being part of the political team. And Sessions said, "No, I didn't meet with anyone as part of when I was a part of the political team." And that was a true statement. And so they ring him over the coals over this miswording or whatever. So the whole thing is just construed, and that's why Trump is upset, right? I mean, these are his key team players who just got put in place a week or two. The Democrats, it's very atypical, right? Every single one of his appointments was held up by the largest number of votes across the board in presidential history, right? So it's just a total Democrat onslaught. They have no agenda except a political agenda of resist.
Right.
And we've seen that nationwide, right, with all these town halls that are blown up and resist. Because, why? Because he is going to be hugely effective in keeping the promises he's made. He's already making huge on Obamacare, regulatory reform, tax reform, a readjustment of foreign policy, beefing up the strength of our military. It's already being enacted, right? And so that's why the left is hyperventilating right now, because they see this agenda unfolding, and they're doing everything they can to stop it.
Look, I think you hit it on the head. That's what they're doing. It's all about resistance. They have no plan. It's a party in decline. And you're right, Congressman Dave Brat, about Jeff Sessions, because, look, he answered a very narrowly defined question in a very narrow way. And so technically his answer was correct. Our beef with it is, look, you're a lawyer. You can know where they're headed with this. You met with the guys 2 times. You had innocuous meetings. There was witnesses there. All you had to say was extend the answer and say, but obviously I met with the Russian ambassador and many others in my role as a U.S. Senator on the Armed Services Committee. Leave it at that.
Right.
That's all he had to say. This whole thing would have blown over. But look, I think you're absolutely nailed it. This whole thing is to stop his agenda, because the Democrats are afraid that if his agenda goes through, he's going to become, like you said, wildly popular, and then they're done.
Yep.
So it's just ridiculous. Dr. Brett, I want to get to legislation that you have put in. You introduced an H-1B L1 Visa Reform Act of 2017. Can you elaborate to our listeners, Congressman, what that is, what it does?
Yeah. Thanks, John. Yeah, I got several bills going through on immigration, and they all follow the Trump logic that our immigration policy should be aimed at what's best for the American worker. And so you'll see a lot of the immigration reform going through in this bill has that goal in mind, right? We need to start making sure that we're attracting the best and the brightest to this country. And then tie it into the negative side, too. We don't want the dangerous folks coming in. And we don't want just a huge number of folks coming from one or two particular countries south of the border, et cetera. If you really believe in diversity, which the left says they do, well, this has always been a very welcoming country and always will be. And so we want to spread that those limited spots, and it's not that limited, right? It's 1 million people have been coming in a year. And so we want to spread those out to the folks who can really help this country out, who share the values of the country, who love the country, and who will not be a threat to the labor market and the lower and middle income folks in our labor markets who need jobs right now in the first place. So there's all sorts of news stories where some companies are letting Americans go, and then before they go, the Americans have to train in the immigrants using these visas, right? And so it's just almost, it is cruel. It's just a cruel joke. And so these type of bills are going to try to end that cycle where huge numbers of folks are just coming in from one or two countries, bringing family members in. Huge fiscal burden on this country. And we need to change that so that the workforce that comes in are not a threat to current American workers in any field, and they will be a net gain to the country. And that overall will be the goal of any immigration bill you see coming forward.
Right. So let me just sum up what you just said. On your bill, you've got a corresponding bill in the U.S. Senate sponsored by Republican Chuck Grassley and Democrat Dick Durbin. So obviously this is kind of a bipartisan effort. But the original objective of the H-1B visa program was to be able to bring people in that had a specific area of expertise where the United States had a specific area of professional need, right? That was the object of it. Bring them in, fill the need, then they leave, right? What it's turned into is process to bring in waves of cheap labor. That's all the thing is, to depress wages for the American workers. The thing is so abused, and I applaud your efforts. What are the odds of it actually getting to the president's desk?
Oh, I think this is pretty good because of that bipartisan piece. We got Pasquale from New Jersey. He and I love debating each other in the budget meetings where we don't agree on everything. But on this one, we do agree. And he's been a fun guy to work with on the other side of the aisle. And everyone thinks we don't get along with each other. We're all good friends up there. We can separate the issues out from the people, but that's probably why it'll pass.
Okay, we got a couple more minutes here, about 4 minutes. Every week we have to ask you the same question. Where are we at? A week has gone by. Any progress made on the replacement for Obamacare?
No, that one looks like it's firm enough to be a fight. The conservatives in Congress who made the promise that we're going to repeal Obamacare have a very hard time with this product that looks like it's coming out that's been leaked in Politico. It looks like Obamacare Light. It has all the features. It's got a mini mandate built in it. It's still got the insurance regs in it. It starts a new federal entitlement program. It doesn't bend the cost curve down. That was the major piece, and the worst part of all is it's still a federal program. Everything the federal government touches right now is insolvent, right? Medicare is insolvent. Social Security is insolvent. Our fiscal health is poor. We can't fund our troops. And we're going to start another federal program with huge tax credits that's paid out from the federal government. And you know those will get bid up over time, right? We'll start it at some level which looks like maybe it'll just bankrupt us a little. And then politicians can't say no at the federal government because we can print money. And so that'll bid up those tax credits over and over, so it becomes just like another entitlement program. And we're already $100 trillion light. We have $100 trillion that we promised to pay that we cannot pay. So I hate to be gloomy, but the prospects of me voting for that are not good. I cannot do that. And so we're going to have to take another whack at it and hope that our leadership will listen, because I think there's way too many conservatives out there. It's not just the Freedom Caucus, right? It's the House Study Committee. It's a bunch of independent-minded people. And they promised their voters they would repeal Obamacare, not leave another federal piece in place.
Okay, so if we look at this thing, Congressman, with reality, they're not the Republican leadership. By the way, some of this is leaked out, but they've got it hidden like the TPP was hidden, where you can't read it, like Obamacare was hidden, because they know if people see it, there'll be outrage. All right, so that's why they hide it, leaks out. But if you just do the math, I mean, you take key conservatives like yourself away, you take members of the Freedom Caucus away, you take some Democrats are not going to vote for it no matter what it is, all right? So you take
none,
a bunch of
none.
Democrats
and then you get
away.
170 in the Republican Study Committee. And so say 30 or 40 of them fade away.
It's over.
Then there's no way you can
There's
pass
no way.
the current bill.
There's no way this is going to get through the House, because I don't think a majority of Democrats are going to vote for it no matter what it is. All right. So I don't see how that. I mean, they don't. Why would they even bring it up if they don't even have a majority on it? Why don't they get with you guys and get back to the table and get something they can actually pass? What are they trying to do?
But leadership is basically going to dare us to vote no on an Obamacare repeal.
Yep.
Right? They're
That's
saying
what they're
this is
gonna do.
regular order, which we didn't have last year in the budget process. And so regular order in this context means it went through two committees that are under leadership, right? And so they're trying to sell it like, hey, it went through it. We still don't even have a bill we can debate, right? And so most people, when you're in 8th grade, you're taught social science, there should be 2 or 3 bills where you can debate and say, here's the better features of this bill. Here's the better features of this bill. And I don't think you're going to find a debate. It's one huge piece of federal legislation with all sorts of bells and whistles attached, as usual, coming down the pike.
So they don't want any debate, and they're going to basically dare. So they're going to get it out of the two committees that leadership controls, and they don't want any debate, and they're going to dare Republicans like yourself, conservatives, to vote no. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, there's been input, right? They allow us to give input, but the input always has to agree with the major logic of a huge federally run piece of healthcare legislation, which is going to be called Obamacare Light, right? When people see this thing, it's going to be called Obamacare Light, and then the Republican Party, do they want to own Obamacare Light at the federal level? And my answer would be no way. That is not the average person. If you have a call-in show and say, "Hey, is this what Republicans were talking about for the past 6 years?" Everyone will say, "No way."
100%. You're not going to get anybody to say they want this. We're out of time. Boy, you absolutely nailed it again. Thanks for being with us. Your candor is refreshing and uplifting. Gives all of us hope. I want to thank Congressman Dr. Dave Brat for being with us. And you can follow Dave. Just go to davebrat.com. How easy is that, right? davebrat.com. And don't forget, sign up for his weekly newsletter. That's where I get all my info out of. He speaks the truth. davebrat.com. Thanks for being with us, Dave.